I told you that the greatest weapon we have to combat human trafficking is you? Would you believe me? Those aren't my words. Those are the words of a former attorney general who brought his state from a failing anti-trafficking state to an A state. And those are his words, because he recognized no matter how many law enforcement specialists they have, they could not do what you can do. They cannot see what you see. And I raise it one bar. I say, the Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon you. He's anointed. For those of you who know Christ as your Savior, He's anointed you to set captives free, like Pastor Matt was saying earlier. This is the problem in our generation. This is our modern day slavery, and we are the solution. In fact, that's why CAN exists. We've packed 35 years experience of doing anti-trafficking, community-based anti-trafficking, to help equip other people, other professionals to do the same. So what we do is we retrofit what's already there, what you do within your profession, the community you already engage. And where nothing exists, we work collaboratively with best practice organizations to create that. Go ahead and turn to the next slide, please. This is one example of that. Isn't it a beautiful place to heal? In 2016 in New Jersey, we worked with Hoving Home and a number of other organizations to make this a reality. Because though they had served the state of New Jersey for over 50 years, a lot of the victims that were being rescued off the streets couldn't leave the state because of parole or custody issues. So this is a resource we need survivors to have access to in every state. And together, we're helping build those resources and get existing quality resources identified as well. By the way, they get over an 80% success rate for victims of human trafficking, for addiction recovery of all kinds. This is a resource you don't have to have insurance to attend. It is a remarkable resource that has been built by volunteers, by people that work, professionals of all kinds, and then also people who donate. Not many organizations donate, but a lot of individuals donate to make programs like this a reality. Go ahead and turn to the next slide, please. So people often ask how it started for me. Like I mentioned, 35 years ago, I had already survived a lot of the kinds of trauma that the victims of human trafficking that we serve do. And from there, in this picture here, I'm a suicidal 12-year-old kid. And in that picture, I'm living in in the valley of Mount Rainier in Washington State, and that's literally the Glacier Water River. And I'm being baptized, but what's interesting there is I experienced from going from suicide to overcoming deep-seated trauma, and I knew if that could happen for me, that could happen for anyone. I didn't know that just yards from that location and months from that moment lived the first victim of human trafficking I would assist. So when I say it happens anywhere, this is a rural community. It really does happen anywhere. Please turn to the next slide. In fact, in the Bible, if you can be a person of faith or not of faith, but it's interesting in the Bible, every time, without exception, when a group of people or an individual led people out of slavery or prevented it in the first place, they were diverse. They were young, old, male, female. They were widows and teenagers. They were Israeli, non-Israeli, but they had one thing in common. God used what was in their hand at the time. And for most of them, it was the tools of their trades. So that is what we're here today to talk about. In fact, we've got panels of experts that are joining us from all over the country to talk about how we have together used the tools of our trades to be part of building a comprehensive response to local human trafficking. Go ahead and turn to the next slide. So what does human trafficking look like? Now, our organization, CAN, mobilizes on 6 categories of human trafficking, modern-day slavery. Today, I'm only going to talk about the 2 that are covered under the federal law. So just by raise of hands, and those of you that are in different locations, you can raise your hands as well. How many of you have actually heard about human trafficking? A lot of us. There have been movies put out over the decades. There have been a lot of information. Some of it has given us a false understanding of what human trafficking is, and some has actually helped us. And so I just wanted to, if you can see this list well, this is an inquiry. And the question is true or false. Human trafficking happens only when? only to the undocumented. Not true. Every single one of these are not true. They're all false. In fact, 83% of the victims of human trafficking in the United States today are our own citizens. And for most of them, it started between the ages of 11 to 14. So that's 5th grade to 9th grade. Now, there are a lot of stats put out there, but I only quote the things that ring true with the service provision that we've done over the years, and I would say that is true. The fact of the matter is we don't know the full impact of what's happening at the border, so we don't know how that is. We know it's affecting our foster care, which is a vulnerable situation. We had testimony in Congress this past year. So we don't know the full impact of what's happening as a result, but we wanted to dispel the myth that it only happens to people outside of America or it only happens to foreign nationals. It really can happen to anyone, anywhere. And in fact, people think, well, you know, an American kid with a cell phone knows to call 911, so clearly they're safe. The fact of the matter is the cell phone becomes a control device. Often, because the trafficker uses it to track, to text, to create meetups for those that they have groomed and lured and entrapped. The chains often aren't physical, but they are often mental, and that usually takes a grooming process. And what it looks like is removing someone from their support system. And then the pressure begins. It looks like abuse, 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 and a moment of kindness. Sleep deprivation, starvation, and a hamburger. So the trafficker isn't just the source of bad, but the source of good. If you want to eat today, if you want to sleep today, then you better do what they say. Then trust forms, and loyalty forms, and even a twisted, codependent kind of love forms. And so those chains are stronger than any other chains that you think of physically. In fact, we see a lot of imagery in anti-trafficking with chains that it gives an incorrect idea that there's physical chains involved. There have been isolated cases, but for the most part, it's not. Another misunderstanding is that it's really easy to identify. It's not. There are a lot of victims that don't know what is happening to them is human trafficking. In fact, we've had people in our recovery home come in for addiction recovery and learn later that they were a victim of human trafficking. So that's why we need to know what it looks like, that we can respond appropriately and safely within our professions because we are the eyes and the ears everywhere. So another idea that is just wrong is that it's mostly foreign national. I want to say that there are so many resources available to those that are undocumented who are victims of human trafficking. We have T visas set aside every year that go unused specific to this population. The national hotline number is connected to law enforcement specialists. Some of them you're going to hear from today. And service provision identified in every state and U.S. territory. You can leave your tips anonymously. You can use that nonprofit hotline that's federally funded to get help. There are a lot of different ways you can use it to your choosing. And so it's a resource for you. So another idea is that awareness of human trafficking will somehow rob a child of their innocence. The opposite is true. Children, youth that have been made aware that I have helped train have identified human trafficking, created additional resources, helped prevent attempts of traffickers on them, their friends, and their family. So students, you're going to hear from one student in a little bit who have helped pave the way within their public school, within higher education, and in academic studies. It is remarkable what people can do right where they are. We've had high school students be the change factor to get government, federal legislators to change their mind. Not even able to vote yet, but they were the factor. So there is no age where you can't make a difference now in this topic. Go ahead and turn to the next slide, please. So what is human trafficking? Human trafficking is the commercial exploitation of an individual by the use of force, fraud, or coercion. By commercial, it has to be the exchange of money, goods, or services. So people think, oh, you know, we didn't exchange money, so it's not human trafficking. And also, when it comes to prosecuting human trafficking, one of those, force, fraud, or coercion, have to be proven. So sometimes we'll find that a trafficker or a purchaser will be prosecuted under different statutes because there isn't enough evidence to prosecute under the human trafficking statute. But where there is, we're seeing an uptick. We're seeing continued graduation. We're having some survivors. Most survivors never testify against their trafficker. So a lot of times, the evidence that they do have, they can put toward other charges that they can mount up to be basically around the same jail sentence as a human trafficking case. So never look at, well, how many cases in my county or my state of human trafficking? Don't look at that as an indicator of the impact of human trafficking locally, because most never go through that. We're working to change that. You'll hear from leaders in that topic soon, but it's important for us to understand what the law says. And then this has to be proven in every case except for minors and sex trafficking. Force, fraud, and coercion do not have to be proven in that situation. Go and turn to the next slide. So let's talk about what it looks like. Human trafficking comes into two categories within the federal law: sex and labor. They are throughout legal and illegal industries. So the first one we want to talk about today is labor trafficking. Labor trafficking is the #1 form of human trafficking globally. In the US, it's second to sex trafficking. And there's a really cool website. I don't know if you guys can see it where you are, but it says slaveryfootprint.org. And it's an inquiry. And it asks you a bunch of questions, and then when it's finished, it lets you know how many slaves you have working for you. Did you know you have slaves working for you? In fact, the top 2 crops tied to child slavery globally are coffee and chocolate. How many of you enjoy either of those? How many of you enjoy them daily? So this inquiry is not put there to condemn us, but to challenge us to get that number down. And we come at this issue in a multi-pronged approach, and one is through consumer awareness. Now, if you go to the grocery store and you've got one bar of chocolate or one brand of coffee next to another, and one has a little green logo that says Fair Trade Certified, and they're roughly the same price, and you know what that sign means, you can easily choose the one that is fair trade. And that has caused the market to go in the right direction. In fact, today, I think most states have the discount store grocery store called Aldi's. Aldi's has their own bag of fair trade coffee at a very fair price. Because again, the supply and demand is creating greater demand because we're voting with our dollars, and it is leading to the freedom of other people. So it's not just in the supply chain of coffee and chocolate, which right here in Hackettstown is the headquarters of what? Of what? Right, Mars. So you've got your M&Ms and your, right? And we're not too far from Hershey, Pennsylvania, right? So we're kind of the Americana chocolate hub of the world. And again, the slavery isn't happening in America, but in the supply chain. Where are they getting that chocolate? There are some stores, for example, the #1 purchaser of fair trade coffee is Starbucks, but they're still not 100% compliant. And so they look for the different kinds. Dunkin' Donuts, 2018, their regular coffee is not compliant, but their espressos in 2018 were reported as 100% compliant, because the customer is saying, hey, can we make that fair trade? I know right here in this church, they make fair trade coffee available in the back. So you can do that. You can make that simple choice. But it's not just in those 2 crops, but it's still in cotton. It's still in what we mine for our cell phones and our vehicles and all kinds of things. And so, but as we are going in the right direction, things are changing. But it's also in the workforce in America. It looks like a Midwest poultry farm. It looks like a California nursing home. It looks like a South Jersey tomato farm. It looks like a Connecticut live-in home par. It looks like a contractor. So it looks like a lot of everyday life, including restaurants. In fact, in that picture to the upper right, or the left, your left, you can see that there is someone doing nails. It can be the person that's doing the nails that is being labor trafficked, and it also can be the person sitting getting their nails done that is being sex trafficked, and the trafficker is paying for her to get her nails done. So you see how in everyday ways this can pop up, and if we notice the difference, we can make a difference, right? In fact, there was a case in Newark, New Jersey of a braiding salon that was run by teenagers that were labor trafficked from African nations. So it really can look like everyday, everywhere life, but it takes us to take that second look to really make a difference. Go ahead and turn to the next slide, please. The second category we're going to talk about today is sex trafficking. It's probably what you've heard about most. And in fact, it intersects all kinds of professions. In fact, the one area that is so saturated as part of the whole cycle is pornography. Pornography, the vast majority of pornography available today is what we call slave porn. The people in the images weren't free when they were made. And then it's also the number one tool that traffickers and pedophiles use to lure and groom their victims. So, and then it also creates a thought pattern, a way of thinking about humans in real life that objectifies them. There was a Princeton study done in the last 10 years that proved this. And it's interesting that within violent offense incarceration, the number one thing they have in common is that there is an addiction to pornography. Now, doesn't it make sense that if you're going to violently hurt people, that rape, murder, whatever, that you have to look at them as an object, if you want to have a clear conscience, if you want to sleep well? And that's exactly what happens when you're saturated and addicted to pornography. And it also, porn addiction, I think it's something like 30 plus states have declared porn addiction a health crisis. What happens when there's an insatiable need for more and more and more? Demand goes up. So this is one area that's part of that full cycle, but again, it's in a lot of places. In fact, truck stops are hubs for human trafficking. And every year, the National Human Trafficking Hotline number puts out a report. And if you've seen it, it's a picture, it's a map of the United States. And oftentimes people draw false conclusions because the calls, they're measuring the calls as little pings. And so a state like New Jersey is lit up like a Christmas tree, where Montana might not even have one little dot. It doesn't mean there's not human trafficking happening in Montana. It means the calls are happening in these different locations. And that's not necessarily a good thing, because we know every state has truck stops. In every truck stop, we see human trafficking happening there. So one of the organizations that have helped create industry standards is Truckers Against Trafficking. And they've gone state by state to require for those seeking CDL licenses to go through a human trafficking training. And so what they have done is, oftentimes if you're stopping at a truck stop, oftentimes you'll hear a little rap on the door. A trucker might just take a picture of the car license plate that just dropped those kids off or dropped those women off and text it to that national hotline number. And they've become heroes across the nation just doing their job. It's kind of like Superman, right? Under his day suit, right? He had a super suit, and that's what we're building. We're building an army of everyday abolitionists everywhere, and best practice recovery resources in reach of every victim with you. Go and turn to the next one. So anyone can be a victim. Anyone can be a trafficker. This was made for me by victims of human trafficking that I have assisted that in New Jersey, but this can be said of any state. Ages 11 to 14. Let's look at where they met their trafficker: at school. In fact, there's a growing scenario, especially in middle school, where middle school and high school students are trafficking other middle school and high school students during class hours. I think I heard it. Anyone want to guess where it can happen without detection? In the bathrooms. In fact, in Newark, New Jersey, the police that work in those locations said, Mandy, the traffickers aren't even going after the high school as aggressively. They're going after the middle school. So this is something that we need to be aware of, and it's not just cities. When we moved out into the country to open a survivor home in rural settings so we could leverage nature to help heal, we ran into a situation where a Girl Scout, a teenager, was being lured by someone who pretended to be a kid that was homeless. And so she was gathering items to help a homeless teenager when her parents intercepted that information. They gave it to law enforcement. They were like, I don't know who my daughter's going to meet up with this person. We don't know anything about him. They connected that cell phone number to a Canadian human trafficking ring, and it was in this county. And it was rural. So, this is where we are right now. If those are watching online, we're kind of in a suburban area, but it was part of this county that was a rural section. So it can happen anywhere, just like that first victim I assisted was in a rural area. So it can really happen to anyone. What really rings true, the most common risk factor is simply being young. The second most common risk factor is having been sexually violated before the age of 18. The current stat for that is 1 in 3 females and 1 in 5 males. And there's a lot happening in our society that is going in the wrong direction, where we are creating systems of early sexualization that create this exact problem. So what can you do about it? Go ahead and turn to the next slide. What can you do? I want to encourage you right now, if you have your cell phone, if you haven't already, all of our literature has this number on it, our website, anything that you all received from us in the programs, all of that information is there. But put this in your phone. This is the National Human Trafficking Hotline number and text. Some of our states have their own hotline number. The problem with that is if a victim is outside of the state, that number doesn't work. So oftentimes we'll give a victim, discreetly give them a hotline number, the national hotline number, so that they can self-rescue when they get themselves ready. Why wouldn't a victim be ready to run yet? Well, sometimes the trafficker has their child. Sometimes they're being trafficked with someone they care about, and if they run and that person stays behind, retribution is going to happen. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes they are addicted. And if they are not ready, fully committed to their sobriety, they will willfully return to their trafficker and be worse off. If you've ever seen someone go back to a trafficker, sometimes they don't make it out of that situation alive. So they have to be committed, and they may not be ready. They might have to get some things in order before they run, just like a domestic violence victim, right? They have to get some, so you want to give them that hotline number in discreet ways, and that's what we help you do within your professions and within community outreaches and awareness. Even food pantries, I was talking earlier, even food pantries, those spaces, because you never know what's happening behind closed doors. Go ahead and turn to the next slide, please. There's some other indicators for sex trafficking I just want to highlight. So what does it look like, right? Because again, a lot of times victims don't know what's happening to them. Sometimes they think they are somehow complicit. So we want to get that message out. It's not normal. It's not your fault, and there is help. And a lot of times a trafficker will manipulate a situation to say, well, actually you did a criminal act under our watch, so therefore we've got you. If you go to law enforcement, they're just going to prosecute you. And so we help them understand what's happened to them. Where they become, they've been subjected to that. And in a lot of states, there are resources to help expunge and vacate the offenses that they have done while under the control of a trafficker. So we help get them resources like that, so they don't have to be afraid to reach out and get help. So some of the I don't know if you guys can see that, but some of the things are like injuries, unexplained injuries. In New Jersey in particular, we've seen a lot of under the hairline, so like concussion, that kind of thing, because the trafficker sometimes doesn't want to mess with the pretty because that's money, right? So we see that. We see branding and tattoos, talking about trades that help. We have tattoo artists that have helped cover up those brandings. And we also see that hotel keys, rolls of cash, multiple phones, or refillable gift cards. Hotel keys, hotel staff, they're one of the areas that have helped us find over 4,000 missing and exploited children in 2.5 years, because we've mobilized them with the faces of the missing children, and they've helped tremendously because they are frequenting hotels. Then we also have unable to make decisions without approval. Oftentimes they don't know where they are. Maybe they don't have access to their documents. And oftentimes they won't even look you in the eye. Someone is speaking for them. It's a very controlled situation. Then there's claims of an older boyfriend or girlfriend. We've even had parents say, man, I thought he was a good guy. He would he'd have her call. He seemed like the best boyfriend ever. because it's very much they're manipulating the parents as well. And they're calling to say, hey, Mom, I'm going to be out. I'm over here. I'm doing this. And they're not. They're being trafficked. And then also sexually provocative clothes or clothes inappropriate for the weather. We've had victims that were barefoot. Those kinds of things can be signs of you think, oh, that's just a troubled person. Take another look. That person may be a trafficking victim, and your tip, again, we're not asking you to do something unsafe. We're asking you to give that information, to respond within your profession in safe and appropriate ways. Go ahead and turn to the next slide, please. Some of those ways we've helped to get the hotline number we're working to get it in every student bathroom in the nation because of what's happening. With 2 other hotlines, in fact, if you're in an in-person location, you can see at the table in the back the information there. But it has the suicide prevention, cutting prevention, and the human trafficking hotline number, because all 3 of those things are happening in student bathrooms. Go ahead and turn. And the other thing I mentioned, to help be part of the ongoing initiative to help find missing and exploited children. Like I said, we've had organizations, churches, businesses, all kinds of people become part of this ongoing initiative. And we have in the in-person locations, we have your state missing children's poster there.